Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Change on the Run podcast, where we discuss common change challenges and ways to address them when you're short of time. I'm your host, Phil Buckley. Today's topic is building momentum. Change initiatives often are exhausting for project teams and people taking on new ways of working. Managing tight timelines, increased workloads, and navigating through challenges can drain teams and sap energy. Momentum is a way for an initiative to stay relevant and supported by igniting leaders and employees' commitment, focus, and effort. So, how do you build momentum so people are engaged, focused, productive, and avoid burnout through change? My guest today is Greg Voeller. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for taking the time. And Greg has over 30 years of experience in communications, change management, and strategy execution. He is currently Senior Director at Gagan McDonald, and he's also the President of the Association of Change Management Professionals, ACMP. Greg, what has been your experience with building momentum during change?
As I think about that question, I almost want to say the flip. I think almost all of our work is in some way, shape, or form focused on building momentum. And I think that that's something that we come to realize as we try to help people experience change, understand what is being continued and what is being changed. And so I think momentum and energy are all so significant in terms of not only just, achieving change, but making that change stick as well, too, as a sustainable new way of doing something for or within an organization.
No, certainly. And it makes sense. Like if people are energized and they're focused and committed and the organization is building momentum, then most would say that it will be a more successful change. But oftentimes I find with organizations, they don't build momentum and it becomes a slog. So why do you think it's so difficult to build momentum over time?
I think there's so many different factors that can go into that. And so let's maybe just start to unpack maybe a few. One is that I would say it's how your change focus is aligned with your overall program management focus. So Phil, as I was thinking about today's discussion and thinking about momentum, I wanted to go back to the Newton description of momentum. And I think it's actually pretty applicable for us. Very simply, momentum is a focus on the mass of an object times the velocity. And so when you really start understanding that aspect, we as change managers, we really need to push our partners who are helping manage a program or a project, really so we understand all of what is included and what are the interdependencies. So I think to answer your question, a piece of what really helps build momentum is when we can have a fuller picture of all of the related dependencies a particular change is going to impact. I know that, in my experience, and Phil, I'm surely guessing you've seen this as well too, is that we feel we would say on any day that, yep, I have a really clear sense of really the change we're driving. And then I kind of get to the next day and I say, I wonder if we really do have a clear sense of the change that we're driving sometimes. Just because of, that clarity of the scope and that clarity of how we are really having an impact that can have a ripple effect along the way as well, too. So I think that's one area, I think in terms of sort of as a blockage to momentum. I think another area is how do we really take a viewpoint that we are impacting people's mind and their mindset? And so if we look at it only from sort of like that we're helping people get ready for a change, that's almost like a static readiness view. I'd really encourage for us to think about how are we actually building perpetual readiness within the people that we are working for or the change is having an impact on is a better way of saying it. And so I think if how we approach that as change leaders, as change professionals, is really critical, that we're always extending that readiness. And that's never a sort of a finite, yep, we've achieved it here on a day one or even a day two of a new change. It's actually how have we built that mindset into days 101 and 102 of a particular change initiative as well too.
You've probably experienced this because I think we all have through our careers. It's if we could only get to, to the top of the hill or that change or that systems implementation, then we're done. And I think it creates false expectations that we are done. If you could tell me more about the mindset, because I think it is great because that programmatic or project, hey, we're doing these 3 changes, it can be exhausting.
And here's the other thing too, and just very much having our project manager colleagues in mind, we recognize that we're working on projects that have specific timelines, milestones, cost considerations, etc. And usually those projects have multiple work streams. Well, we also recognize that the people that are impacted by change, they don't think in work streams, and they actually think in experiences. And really, how is item A with item B and item C, how is that all coming together for me in my experience? And so I think this is a really critical element for us as change leaders to think about is, what is that experience? What is accumulated experience and what's the byproduct of that? For what we've all gone through over the last year, we can clearly understand where energy, where fatigue, it's different now for many of us. And frankly, it's influenced by factors that are way outside any one of our control. But we also need to recognize that those factors are there, because they influence how a person approaches her or his day, how they approach her or his work in a particular project. And so when we think about it, really almost, walking in the shoes, that really deep, deep, deep empathy of how people are working today, that becomes a source for how we can really reshape their beliefs and really reshape their experience then as well too.
Your point about the experience of people who are going through change and that leading to positive adoption or not, and it doesn't stick is a great point. And where we are right now, as we're sort of emerging to the next phase, some call it the roaring 20s, but definitely a perception of greater commerce or greater activity. What I'm seeing is that some organizations are almost snapping back to a pre-pandemic world where almost you get rewarded for taking on more or biting off more than you can chew, so that you do have many, many priorities, potentially more than the resources that you've got. And it seems like when you ask yourself, well, you've got really smart, really educated, really seasoned people falling into that potential trap. Why are they doing it? And perhaps it's their reward mechanisms. Any comments about that so that we don't have our clients and our organizations making some mistakes that we know will not lead to effective adoption?
We are all now in some mode of new ways of working. Some way, shape, or form, our work life has been impacted. And I think it would not be smart if we think in this new environment of working that we go back to some of the earlier structures and processes that we thought were supporting that. So again, I think another big blocker of momentum is when you really don't understand, your stakeholder group and really not identifying with what is driving them forward, what gives them reinforcement, what gives them joy, and frankly, what blocks them from success. And by the way, when I say success, I think personal success is going to be evaluated far differently going forward based on the pandemic. I think people are going to be looking at a holistic view on what really matters to them in their lives much more significantly. So I think organizations need to realize that. I think organizations need to realize that title, salary, are going to be less important, frankly, for many people around the world. And this is part of what we need to incorporate into how organizations are wanting to drive change. You just cannot be a monolithic, like it used to be type of viewpoint.
And maybe this is sort of framed under lessons to learn from what you've seen of what not to do. Have you ever worked with an organization that, given however they manage themselves, you couldn't build momentum, whether it's the structures or the attitude to employees? Was there any one that you couldn't crack to build momentum?
The organizations that I think have the biggest challenge to build and maintain momentum are those organizations that don't see a connection between everything they're doing and the outcomes view of what that's driving for them. Let me say it a little bit even more simply, is that organizations that look at change as activities, that look at it as checklists, without really addressing the experience and the behavioral focus, those are really tough examples where it'll be really challenging to say they will build the momentum that they really need. And so that sounds really simple as we say that, sort of that outputs versus outcomes. But I see actually more organizations would actually fall into the camp of more of they're an output type of organization. And in reality, it's not even a verse, it's a both and. You need to have a focus on outputs and activities to drive the outcomes that you are looking to achieve. Either or thinking is a huge derailer in any organization. And when you experience that as a change leader, that's such a golden opportunity and an essential opportunity for you to say, we really need to reframe the conversation. We need to take this into something that has mutual benefits. How are we building the both and in terms of this situation? Without that, I think it's going to be a real challenge for you to really grow and build the success you're looking for.
So we went to the dark side. Let's go to the positive side. And I know that, Greg and McDonald, you do so much work with purpose and with culture and the sense of sort of dignity within one's work. So that's sort of the positive side of things. Do you have any examples of what you would do to help an organization build momentum? So what are things that actually work where people do get aligned on the purpose, they go forward, and it's a great experience?
We do very much look at change through that very strong humanistic lens. And we recognize that by and large, the natural human condition is for individuals to struggle with change. That's the starting point. And so when we recognize that, is really, I think then the momentum builders are around really empathizing deeply with stakeholder groups, people, and really what comes together in their mind about things that push them forward, but things that also that hold them back. And so, I think that organizations that have success, they don't overlook, your stakeholder analysis. And actually, I would almost challenge other change leaders, don't even look like it as an analysis. Look at it more of like an ethnograph, right? Where you're really immersively getting to know a stakeholder group and you understand their experiences collectively and what that forms as their viewpoint right now going forward. So I think that's a huge stepping stone and foundation to really build a successful and momentum building type of change orientation and program and organization. The other piece that I would share, really what we do from a Gag and McDonald perspective, is that we help our clients really at the end of the day understand and put into practice that it's really three things that change everything. And we very much believe this. And what that means is that we believe in the power of and the connection of, number one, a compelling story. Number two is the commitment and alignment of leaders. And number three is the intentional roadmap of experiences that all stakeholders are having. When you recognize that all three of those are interconnected with each other, and that in many ways, many of the change processes and methodologies that many of us are experienced with, it all kind of bubbles up to that.
Is there room for co-creation with the people going through experience? So I'm thinking sort of along design thinking. I know with ACMP, Banaz is doing a session on it. Is there room for that so that people are actually creating their own experiences?
There's absolutely room for that. And actually that room has grown and grown and grown, I think even more so over the last several years. We don't go into any particular engagement thinking that we are going to provide a solution to our client. Every one of our engagements is a focus on co-creation, almost from the get-go, truthfully, in terms of how we start that discussion and how we drive that forward. Remember, one of the things I said in three things that change everything includes committed and aligned leaders. We have a viewpoint that leaders exist at all levels. Well, part of what drives commitment and alignment is ownership. And so when you engage individuals within the development of that solution, when you engage individuals in understanding what their fellow colleagues are truly experiencing, from that design thinking mode as well too, that is powerful. And that sows the seeds for stickiness and sustainability then of the change then going forward as well.
Anything that comes to mind where you've invited people in to create the solution and they came up with something probably quite different than what you would have done based on their culture and their experience?
For a current organization that we're working with, very much so. It's really helping them evolve their new ways of working. They're in an industry that is challenged directly from the pandemic. And so we've taken an approach of really, I would say, deep empathy within this organization to help them see what outcomes they can drive through their transformation process. And so it's something I said earlier too, this organization tends to be, frankly, a little bit more focused on outputs and activities. And so by learning about this organization, by inviting input into this, I mean, we've been doing virtual workshops right now, and there's tools, I think, if you haven't used things like Mural or other types of tools that can really drive virtual co-creation type of sessions here as well too. I would really encourage you to do so. But that experience, yeah, it's led us to some interesting, different thinking than probably at least when we started out, based on some of the information there as well too. What's great about that is that organization, we've met with people around the world with them, and we can see the nuggets of how somebody in Eastern Europe made a point compared to somebody in Asia. And while they never would make the connection by themselves, we were blessed to be working with the team that could see what a connection could be for them. So I think this is part of the new world, even more so now that we've become even more strongly virtual, is how do we help people make connections that they haven't quite yet seen yet? And so that is, I think, something that I get energized about then when I work on an engagement, because I see what the power is and the opportunity is there as well too.
Do you see nuances of culture change by the way we help people change their organizations?
Oh, completely. And we're just on the cusp, I think, of really truly understanding what the cultures of today and tomorrow will be in organizations. I think there's a lot of information out there right now about how the pandemic has forced organizations to change their culture. There's also evidence out there about organizations that have been willing to change their culture. And I think the impact and differences that those organizations that see what's happening around them and that they adapt their culture accordingly. Said differently, if you force fit a culture around things that are really not part of your organization's experience and your capability to do, I think it's going to be a struggle for you. But I look at organizations that have been really intentional. Maybe that's the key word. Intentional about their culture, what they're seeing around them, and then how their culture itself must evolve. It cannot be static. It needs to evolve in terms of new ways of working. Frankly, different expectations from clients and customers in this world today as well too. How all of that needs to come together to shape the beliefs, the thinking, and again, the experiences that employees feel and that they then deliver.
How does ACMP help people get through this when their organizations are struggling with momentum, or there's so much to manage and change given our current realities?
Again, I'm so pleased and proud of what ACMP and that community has brought together over the last 12 to 24 months in helping not only just change professionals, also in addition, it's individuals who are change curious and change thirsty that wouldn't necessarily classify themselves as change professionals. One of the most significant benefits that we've provided to our members is a new virtual collaboration tool called ACMP Connect. And we just launched that in January. And imagine this, it's bringing together nearly 5,000 change professionals across the world in very specific dialogue type of discussions. So we opened up ACMP Connect with an initial set of discussion forums, ranging from all the way from how you are dealing with driving change in today's world to something like agile change management, to data-driven change management, the convergence of coaching and change management. So these are all specific facilitated forums out on ACMP Connect where our members are coming together, they are posting questions, they are engaging with fellow change professionals to really increase the entire sort of knowledge level and capability level then for each other. And so it's been just a fascinating platform to watch and be a part of, from a learning perspective and how it can go apply things as well too. So that's a huge, I think, value that you receive as an ACMP member. The other piece, though, around what ACMP provides really to the world, I think is also something I'd like to just quickly mention, and that's the standard for change management. And the standard for change management is really meant to be a tool for a change professional for sure on how she or he can drive change effectively within their organization. And also, too, it's a tool that a business manager, a service leader, maybe a small business owner would also benefit from because it provides the blueprint. It provides a template about how she or he might also be thinking about change and how to drive that in their organization when maybe they don't have the connection to a change professional.
Definitely the portal. I love it's almost like call a friend where you can, hey,
Yeah.
I'm stuck in a jam. How do I get out? So I thought that was great. Do you have any advice for the listeners on how to sustain momentum? Because, you could have a kickoff meeting from a large change and there you're pretty well guaranteed to get the momentum up because that's the focus. But, over time it can recede or become to a lesser degree. Any thoughts about keeping that momentum up and sustainable?
I really do think it's always staying close to your stakeholders, and don't ever assume that you are always understanding your stakeholder. And so let me be a little bit more practical too. I think there's so much significant value for continued conversations with your stakeholder groups to really understand in that day, because every day is a new experience for them. In that day, again, what is pushing them forward and what is going to hold them back? And so I think that always sort of an icebreaker, if you will, or to break the log jam is to really understand where that team is at and how do you then appreciate and understand the dynamics of that and build change solutions that are incorporating that fluidity, if that makes sense as well too. So I think it just always goes back to really, really try to, as best as you can, walk in the shoes with your stakeholder, not walk in your shoes of your stakeholder.
As we know, leaders have a foundational role in the success of change and the leadership of it. Any thoughts on the role of the leader or what you would coach that individual on their role, on what they need to do to sustain momentum?
If we would do a word analysis over the last year, we probably have seen the term empathy more than we've ever experienced it in our lifetime. I would challenge leaders, though, to be proactive with their empathy. And here's what I mean by that, Phil. I think that it's critical that leaders continue to learn how to listen. We can all learn how to listen. It's one of the most understated components of communication that we don't reinforce. And what does good listening look like? Well, it's being there with the individual. It's understanding, again, how she or he are experiencing a moment. And again, what their joys are, what their fears are. And then I think what I coach leaders to really think about then is how are they taking the experience that they learned from one group of individuals with another group of individuals and say, what is common and what is sort of custom across that? And then what does that mean for us as an organization? What does it mean for my team? What does it mean for my business unit? What does that mean for my function, et cetera? I think really excellent change leaders understand their people. They understand then from there the change risks and the change readiness opportunities, and they build their leadership plan accordingly. And so I think we have an important role to help leaders see that. Great leaders do it somewhat naturally. Most leaders need that support and that guidance and that coaching to help them become stronger and stronger in that as well too. And that's a critical role we can play.
Where there's a tendency, I think, for a lot of leaders to move into action versus listening. Is there any way to kind of help people kind of suspend the reaction or that knee-jerk reaction for just let me in, I'm going to take over, and actually honor the listening that we know works so much better?
We've all been there, and we know that happens so much. And let's appreciate that, and let's not discount that. However, what could we also, with that, again, let's apply both and thinking here, is that can we also hold ourselves accountable as after when we communicate what we think is something really important, can we also then do a check for understanding? So for what I just shared with you, so what does that mean for you? And what's going to help us move forward in that? What's going to block us from moving forward in that? Those types of check-ins, those follow-up check-ins, it's a form of listening. It's just that you're doing it at a different part of the process as well too. That's again our opportunity. We know leaders who are just want to say, give me the script, I'll share it. We got to expand that view with them. We got to expand that view because what we need to help expand them to is that they're driving people's mindset, thinking, experiences, and behaviors with that. And so it's not just that they're dispensing information, it's that they're impacting something within somebody's mind.
And in the spirit of change on the run, if you didn't have a lot of time and you could only do sort of one action to build momentum, maybe you're coming in on a rescue or there's been a huge drop in momentum and you need to kind of come in and intervene, what would be the one thing you'd focus on that would give you 80% of the results in 20% of the time?
Here's what I think I would do real quickly is I would list out all the assumptions that I have along with the project team. And I would go then and have minimally a starting discussion then with stakeholders who are impacted. And I want to see where our assumptions line up against where the stakeholder group is at. And then from there is let's figure out how much of our assumptions stick. And by the way, not all of them will by any stretch, but at least we have, I think, greater stakeholder insights that are actionable for us and for us to do something with.
Thank you so much. And I'm just wondering, as we round off the show, is there an insight or a watch out or a tip that you could share with the listeners, either something that we've already talked about or something new under the banner of building momentum that you'd like people to take away with today?
Listen for both and thinking. When you are hearing either or type of conversations, insert yourself into that and see where the opportunities are to drive both and thinking with that. And then secondly, be really thoughtful about yourself as a change leader, as a change professional, because the energy that you demonstrate to your team and others you work with is going to be similar to the energy you'll get back, from the rest of the team as well too. So part of that is that take care of yourself as a change professional. Be thoughtful in terms of your own well-being so that you can provide great energy, great focus, great coaching, great leadership to the organizations you serve as well.
Great advice. Thank you so much. And Greg, thanks so much for being on the Change on the Run podcast. I appreciate you sharing your perspectives and experience. How can people get in contact with you?
Oh, thanks for asking, Phil. Certainly look at my LinkedIn profile. And then my email address is g.voeller, V as in Victor, OELLER, @GagenMac, GAGENMAC.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, Phil. It's such a pleasure.
And I'd also like to thank our producer, Charlie Buckley, and thanks to you for listening. And the Change on the Run 44 Ways to Survive Workplace Uncertainty book that addresses all podcast topics is now available. So go to changeontherun.com or your favorite bookseller to learn more. Until the next time, I wish you all the best as you continue to lead change.